And for more, let's speak to Deborah Elms, the head of trade policy at Heinrich Foundation. Deborah, no trade deal yet, but how significant is this framework, and should we even be optimistic?
That's a great set of questions. I mean, how optimistic should we be? It's better than having someone storm out of the meeting, yeah. But it's unclear what has been agreed to besides a sort of pathway to a framework to implement a concept of a plan. So, it's early days. This is going to take some time. But I suppose that the good news is that both sides do seem to see that escalation is not in their interest. And they agree that negotiations or discussions are important pathways to get to some kind of resolution. Beyond that, though, it gets complicated, right? What are we trying to accomplish? Who's going to move on what timelines over what issues is still evolving.
Commerce Secretary Lutnick says that it should resolve the sticking point of rare earth. Is this a good sign that a deal could be on the card soon?
I mean, I suppose it could be. I mean, I would discount most of what Lutnick says because it's rarely accurate. But if he thinks it's important, obviously rare earths do matter, magnets do matter. I think both sides have identified that they have some cards to play in this dispute, and both have shown a willingness to use those if the negotiations start to unravel. If they can stop an escalation of tensions, I think that's great news. And we'll have to wait and see if we get any more details about what exactly did the two sides agree. Did the U.S. agree to withdraw some of its restrictions on tech, especially semiconductor high-tech equipment transfers? And what did China agree to do on critical minerals and magnets? We'll wait for the details on these.
Now, we're waiting for the details from this juncture, though. What are the biggest challenges ahead that could possibly derail the framework from turning into a full-fledged deal?
It could be any one of 1,000 things. I mean, part of the problem is that we started off with a fairly straightforward discussion on tariffs, where the two sides had rapidly escalated tariffs to an unsustainable level. But the tariff discussion is only a small piece of what is now on the agenda. It includes things, as you mentioned, like rare earths, critical minerals, magnets, semiconductor and other high-tech export restrictions, export controls in general, investment curbs, visa issues. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that you could put on the negotiating cards for both sides. All of them are difficult. All of them require compromise from both sides. Neither side, neither Trump nor Xi, I think, is in the mood to compromise. And so I think there are lots of things that could go horribly wrong in these discussions unless they keep to the sort of bedrock principle that we do not want to have an escalation of tension going forward.
Now, seeing the concerted effort on both sides in agreeing on this framework, are you seeing a shift in US-China relations as a result of these talks in London?
I think it's too early to say. I think what is encouraging is that we've now had many hours of discussions with both sides. I think talking is always better than not talking, but the fact that it's proving difficult to get clear outcomes is a worry. The fact that both sides have to fly back to their leaders to present whatever was discussed in person to their leaders in 2025 tells you something about the negotiating leverage that the teams had on the ground. In other words, they weren't authorized ahead of time to accept an agreement. They have to go back in person to the Oval Office, to Beijing, and to present this information and then get the approval, perhaps, to move ahead. I think that it shows you how complicated these talks will ultimately be.
But undoubtedly, the clock is ticking down on President Trump's tariff deadlines. What are the chances that Washington is able to secure its deals not only with China, but with the rest of the world before that deadline?
Well, we have two different deadlines here. The deadline for everybody but China is coming very fast. It's officially July 9th when reciprocal tariffs in the full amount are supposed to snap into effect absent some kind of deal in place with trade partners. Those deals have been very thin on the ground. So far, we only have a framework deal with the UK in place. Everyone else is in a sort of holding pattern. It's unclear how many deals we might actually get. And as you just saw, 3 of the key trade negotiators, or 3 top officials, just spent multiple days in London trying to deal with China. So the bandwidth and the capacity to put together comprehensive agreements with other countries is limited. Timelines are short. With China, the timeline is a little bit longer. They have a slightly different 90-day deadline. But in any case, these are short deadlines for very complicated negotiations with an awful lot of trading partners. And ultimately, the decision maker is Donald Trump himself. And his capacity to manage all of these decisions is also time limited. He only has so many hours in a day in which he could actually get into the details or even sign off on an agreed upon commitment.
Now, from your perspective, what happens if all the deals aren't reached by then?
Well, that's sort of the interesting game that we're in right now. I think the plan was to escalate tariffs on July 9th. I think that is still the plan. But as if we didn't have enough complexity to deal with, the court systems in the United States have declared that Trump's use of a specific tool to impose these tariffs is illegal. An appeals court has put that on hold. In other words, the tariffs are still being collected. That hearing by the appeals court is not scheduled until July 31st, which means it will be after the reciprocal tariffs are supposed to kick in. So the question now is whether the Trump administration will proceed with escalating those reciprocal tariffs or not on July 9th, whether deals are reached or not, or whether the partners will continue to negotiate knowing that this is all pending in the courts. I think the complications, the confusion, the lack of certainty is going to be our future for at least several weeks, months, and even years ahead.
Well, many thanks for your insights. We've been speaking to Deborah Elms, the head of trade policy at Hinrich Foundation. Thank you.